Looks like it's going.
All right. 3, 2, 1.
I think it already started.
Should we?
Yeah, 3, 2, 1 is a little late, Joe.
Let's see. Well,
We
good
are-
afternoon, everybody. This is the About the Labor. I am your host, Joe Johnson, owner of PurplePTSD.com, VikingsTerritory.com, PurpleTerritoryRadio.com, so on and so forth. Here with Mr. Kirby O'Connor. That side did not didn't connect that with my feelings for you as a human being, because
No, I said it all.
it did. It's but I love you, man. Kirby is the editor of the aforementioned network, and resides out in Portland, Oregon, right?
Yep.
I want to give people a good sense of where we are geographically.
You want
for,
them to
the top.
understand that we span the length of this country.
Yeah, we're soon to be international, I think. I mean, there's a huge no, we already are. We have the Skull of Vikings in Espanol from Monterrey, Mexico. That huge contingent of not only one group of Vikings fans, but there's two groups of Vikings fans that apparently hate each other in Monterrey, Mexico. So whenever I misspeak about one versus the other, they're like, which is a very Vikings thing to do. We are also joined, as always, with Mr. Deshaun Vaughn, who is the managing editor of PurplePTSD.com and VikingsTerritory.com, and resides in Maryland?
Yeah.
For some reason, it popped in my head, Arlington, Virginia, but I don't know why. How are you doing, man?
We're great. We are doing fine over in these parts.
Sorry, my things are cutting out a little bit for me, but that usually happens in the beginning of the show. We like to lower expectations before we knock it out of the park. Well, we have a few Vikings tidbits of news to get through training camp. This idea that the salary cap in 2021 might be negative $50, which and how that'll impact the team. Some thoughts on Cousins being the MVP of the Vikings for the past decade, according to PFF. But obviously, topic 1A for essentially everybody across the globe, especially across America and especially in Minneapolis, is the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis Police Department. The Vikings have responded to that in a few different ways. The NFL has. I thought it would be a good place to start to get our individual thoughts on that. I mean, you guys can take it any way that you want to. Obviously, I think we should touch on the idea that the Vikings should or could sign Colin Kaepernick and whether or not that would do anything to, extend an olive branch or quell some of the anger on the ground. I personally don't think that a symbolic move by a football team would do anything. I also don't think that Colin Kaepernick would want to be used in that way. It seems kind of strange in my opinion, but I wanted to kick it to Deshaun first for obvious reasons. For those of you joining on the video stream, I don't think it would be right for me, a straight white man, to give you my take on things first and foremost, but I will interrupt you angrily from time to time. I'm kidding.
About the Colin Kaepernick thing, I think it's probably too little too late for Colin. It's been almost 4 or 5 years since he's been cut from the 49ers. So I think just from a football sense, it doesn't really make sense for anybody. I think he's probably 33 years old or something like that by now. So he doesn't really have much of a career left for a quarterback the way he played.
Yeah.
So I just I kind of think that at this point in time, it'd just be like a PR stunt. It probably wouldn't be received very well at this point in time. Kind of like how everybody kneeling all of a sudden is kind of like almost kind of tacky because like we knew at first how it was received. So to kind of like do it now as like this, like, we understand now. It's just like kind of like a tacky move. So I mean, instead of signing Colin Kaepernick because the NFL kind of already blew that. It's kind of like you come up with your own new way to, go about changing things.
Yeah, it seems like it would be a very NFL thing to do. It seems like in situations like these, they tend to do the wrong thing until they find the right thing, or they're forced via public opinion to do the right thing. And again, I mean, I just don't think that Kaepernick, and you're right, he's 32, soon to be 33, hasn't played for a long time. He financially he's set from the Nike deal, which was like an 8-figure deal for him. He's transitioned more into the political and civil rights aspect of having that as his career, and again, it just to me would scream like really bad taste to do it. I think he would see it that way. His credibility being purchased by the NFL to say, "Hey, look what we're woke. Look what we're doing." It'd be like Jay-Z times a million. And so, I mean, I was on record after. I think it was after Bradford got hurt, wanting to bring Kaepernick here from a football standpoint. I mean, I think that there's not a whole lot a football team can do right now. I mean, the stuff that's been happening across the board is different. It's not a regular protest that's just going away. It's not just the regular kind of riots that we've seen in situations like these in the past. Everything's amped up to 200, and it just feels like, again, that having Kaepernick roll out with a purple jersey on, throwing footballs at injustice, it's just not going to it's too late for that, like you said. What do you think, Mr. O'Connor?
Yeah, I think the idea of signing Colin Kaepernick is incredibly. It would be incredibly tone deaf for a couple of reasons. Like, there's like a crowd of people that would be extremely happy about it because you're making some sort of symbolic gesture to them. But I think that crowd is dwarfed by the number of people that are like, who would think, well, this is a really dumb move. And then also the other side of people who I don't agree with at all, who would be like, wow, just reactionary. You can't have an opinion anymore. You can't. I saw this a lot on Drew Brees' stuff to transition into that. A lot of people saying that they stand with Drew Brees and like they support his completely missing the point opinion about the protests of kneeling. So I think you'd piss those people off as much as you would confuse the people in the middle who are like, this is just like you guys were saying, this is just like a token move and it doesn't really do anything. I think like I said, I think there's a small contingent, like a smaller contingent of people that would be happy about it, and they would cry that it's a great move. But from a football perspective, absolutely it doesn't make sense. I looked it up. He's 32 years old right now. So he's older than Kirk Cousins. He would sit behind Kirk Cousins, and I don't think he wants to do that. There would be absolutely no opportunity for him to ever play outside of the preseason or if Cousins got hurt. And he just doesn't seem like the kind of guy to want to be a backup. Like if he had wanted to be a backup like that badly, he probably could have. He probably would have, just put down. Like this is bad to maybe this is bad to say. Maybe his morals are so strong, but I feel like he could have if he really wanted to still have a career in the NFL as a backup, he would have waited until over a certain amount of time. I feel like, and maybe that's me being a white person and misunderstanding the whole situation. But
yeah, I don't know. I think it's best for in that regard. I mean, look at what Drew Brees came out and said, and the timing as to how he said it. I liked what Conan O'Brien said on on his show, which was he wanted to do more listening than talking. I think that Brees's comments was incredibly ill-timed. It's we don't get political on the show or the site unless we have to, unless it's Trump talking about filling up stadiums with COVID people with the hopes that they can write off concession stand purchases on their taxes, or some of those tweets. But I think objectively, and I'm sure I'll get slammed for saying this, but the idea that kneeling in the first place was an affront to the military is kind of in and of itself. The way I look at that is if the powers that be on your side of the political spectrum are saying, they're twisting the message that people are repeatedly saying, it's not about the military, it's about police brutality, but they're changing the narrative of it. To me, that just reads that, yeah, there's not a whole lot that we can do to defend this behavior from the police, so let's turn it into a military or patriotic issue. One thing I will say, and this is something that I want your guys' take on, obviously. I was surprised by the amount of right-wing talking heads like Rush Limbaugh or what's her face, that scarecrow.
Tommy Loren.
No, the Judge Janine.
Oh, the other one.
Yeah, close. Coming out and essentially talking a lot of shit about the cop and basically coming out against the Minneapolis Police Department and how bad that police department has been for a long time, which it really has. It's been bad since I was young. I grew up in the Murderapolis era over North Minneapolis. I studied police theory, sociology of basically policing at the U of M. One of my professors was the chief of police of St. Paul, the former one, and he basically talked a lot about how the Minneapolis Police Department was, long and short, a gang in and of itself. They had to get rid of the gang task force that Minneapolis had because they were basically going around anyone that had a record, that was on parole, that had gang connections. They would just go confiscate their property and divide it amongst themselves. It's been a problem for a really long time. The FBI has investigated the Minneapolis Police Department on multiple occasions. They haven't done anything about it. I think one of the main reasons I didn't end up being a police officer, even though I am post-certified, is that I never really agreed with the thin blue line of no snitching, I guess. Like, it's such a weird cognitive dissonance to me. I know I'm all over the place, but for the police to get frustrated that people in gangs or what have you, they don't speak to them, that you don't get any eyewitness testimony for a crime, so they can't solve it. But at the same time, if you're a police officer that complains about something you've seen a fellow police officer do that was illegal or immoral, I mean, you can die. And that was a really big part of the Minneapolis Police Department. It still is. And so I think that this was a watershed moment. Like I said, having Rush Limbaugh go on The Breakfast Club and say those things, and then somehow 2 seconds later say white privilege is a myth, which is like, oh man, you were this close, Rush. You almost had it, and then you lost it. And so it is, I think a little, I mean, speaking from my experience this last week, I don't think I've been afraid like this since I was a little kid, like in a haunted house, just dealing with, trying to protect the liquor store that employs basically my entire family, making the decision as to whether or not my fiance should stay in treatment at Park Avenue in the middle of multiple fires, reports of rape, videos she was sending me of people driving around shooting guns in the air, saying, it's 1 a.m, wait till sunup, or maybe you can run to this location and I can get a car there. It's been terrifying. I've always thought that I would be able to, and this is extremely naive of me and screams privilege on my end, having people come up to the liquor store where it's just me as I'm 6'3", like 275 pounds, thinking either my size or my ability to speak human to human would stop things from happening. And I just saw such palpable anger from people that I hadn't seen before. I've been in 4 riots now. I was in actually 5. the two U of M ones, in the hockey ones in the aughts, and then the two back-to-back in Madison, Wisconsin. And those were just drunken nonsense, happy, super white hockey things or Halloween things. This just felt this just there was things in this riot that literally that terrified me. And then my only fear or frustration as a progressive person is that you're going to end up with more militarization of the police, an increase in gentrification because you're burning down businesses that were already stretched thin because of COVID, and now they're going to be replaced by a Walgreens or what have you. I just don't want the issue to get lost in the fray of everything that's been going on. And so I just, I think things have calmed down now. I think the majority of protests have been peaceful, but being someone that was in the midst of the riot for a week, it sucked. I got nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, I think, not to take it over, if Deshaun has a point, I'll give it to him. But I think a majority of this is an important point to make. I know we're not talking football right now, but this is an important point to make, I think, is that like a lot of the rioting and the looting is not being done by people who are really protesting. Like, obviously there is some violent protesting. I'm not disagreeing with that, but I think at least in Minneapolis a ton of very organized right-wing groups came in and neo-Nazis essentially, and took advantage of that situation to target businesses and target libraries and target medical centers, pretty much anywhere that will help people of a lower income. And I think that's like textbook fascist techniques.
Yeah, the somebody on my block had a heart attack the day before yesterday. Maybe it was yesterday. I don't know. It's all blending together. But I was getting out of the shower and I saw two guys in my front yard, and I had my glasses off so I couldn't really see. I saw an EMT, and then I saw two guys that I thought were EMTs with machine guns walking through my front yard. And I was like, that can't be right. So I put my glasses on, and essentially when there's a call for a medical emergency now, the National Guard is shadowing fire trucks and ambulances. And it turns out that people were calling in fake emergencies and looking to ambush the police. I don't think they've done it yet, but there's been people posting on apps like Citizen that say the police have actually turned down calls for medical emergencies, or 911 dispatchers have, because they said that sounds like essentially a setup. I mean, I have countless pictures from my neighborhood of people spray painting their building, children alive inside, so on and so forth. Our library got burned down. We've had multiple reports of people sitting in pickup trucks with gas cans. Some idiot gas station owner about a mile and a half away from where I live was letting protesters fill up gas cans for free. I don't know why he thought that was a good idea. And so, yeah, I also think that, it's hard because everyone on each political side will point to bad behavior from the other side and nothing will get accomplished. And so I'm hoping some of the leaders on the team, I mean, everything Vikings related is about this. I mean, it is our city. Our city was on fire. It's extremely depressing from that regard. But I think the players on the team are saying and doing, the right things. Kendricks came out and said, if you're doing nothing, you're not doing enough. I think Alexander Madison came out today with a statement. 12 different players were at his memorial today. And so I'm proud of the team for doing that, because I don't think the NFL has the best track record in that regard. But yeah, it sucks. It just sucks. I mean, with COVID and this, it just feels like the start to like a Purge movie or something, like just seeing these things, people in masks and stuff. The worst.
2020 is a movie. It's a movie. I'm gonna film it.
I feel like we're in some sort of alternate timeline that like we're the Back to the Future where he doesn't they don't stop Biff from
yeah, like when Biff has the casino.
Yeah.
Well, that's not far off because if you think of Biff in that movie and then you think of who's running the country right now, there's a lot of similarities there. Anyway, yeah, I hope everyone is staying safe. I love Minneapolis a lot. I was born here. I've never lived outside of the city. I take a lot of pride in living here. And it's just it's shameful that our police department has been this awful for this long, that the second Minneapolis is the second biggest city in the country in regards to the disparity between white salaries and standard of living and those of African Americans. And I don't think things will get lost in the fray. I can see how people get sucked into it because I was extremely mad for a few days and I was just like, what, this is so counterproductive. But it just feels different. And I think that hopefully that'll be the positive coming out of this, because this country this boogaloo movement is freaking me out, man. I don't know if you guys heard about that, but there's these boogaloo people. This sounds like a movie. Have you heard of the boogaloo people? Oh my God, what is happening? Anyway, let's get back to football. Unless you guys had anything you wanted to add to that.
Nah, I think I'll stay away from the boogaloo people.
Yeah, God, those damn boogaloos. One of the topics we're going to talk about obviously is training camp, and the Vikings came out with, well, Kirby, if you want to, you kind of added that to the agenda. If you want to talk about training camp, some of the changes that they're making in regards to, I think it's shared practices.
Yeah, so the NFL made a statement 2 days ago, so on Wednesday, regarding training camp. Training camp is happening in much like a normal way for the actual teams themselves.
Thank God.
They just won't. You're not allowed to travel for it outside of like team facilities. So the Vikings will host it at the TCO Performance Center in Eagan. So that doesn't affect them at all. But for example, Dallas usually goes to Southern California for their training camp for whatever reason. And now they aren't allowed to do that. So they'll have to host their own training camp at their own facilities. And like I said, the Vikings have a state-of-the-art facility in TCO, so they really won't be too affected. But some of these other teams that have practice facilities that are intended for like walkthroughs and like normal practices during the season, like those teams are going to have to get a little creative because of the fact that instead of having 55 people, and of those 55, like 22 practicing at a time, you've got 90 people that you're trying to work out at the, you're trying to get them through drills and trying to get them all, their opportunity to get reps in. So that'll be interesting to see for teams that have smaller practice facilities. No joint practices. The Vikings have done 2 in Zimmer's time. One with Jacksonville, I believe, 4 years ago, and one with Cincinnati 2 years ago.
Didn't one of those have like a fist fight in it?
That was Cincinnati.
Yeah.
I think Pac-Man Jones was still on the Bengals, and he got in a fight with one of the receivers.
Pac-Man? Never.
Never, not that guy.
He's so laid back.
He's the calmest. But there's none of those, which is, I mean, Zimmer is on the record as saying that he didn't want to do a joint practice this year anyways, because they've got so many young guys. He's worried about them getting technique down before they throw them against other people. But they got offers to do a couple, or to do one, because they're going to Cincinnati in week 2 of the preseason and then to Cleveland in week 3. So super close to each other, and the coaching staff has a connection to both places, obviously, with Kevin Stefanski moving to Cleveland this offseason. So there was an opportunity for one, but it sounded like Zimmer didn't want to do one anyways. So it doesn't really matter to the Vikings. But it does mean that nobody's going to be having those joint practices. I also think it's going to be a little bit of a dry run for the season to see. I assume that they'll be very closely watching players and testing them at as many, points as possible to see just how much like interacting and having those team activities will affect the spread of the disease. and that'll
Well,
probably.
here's a interesting hypothetical that just occurred to me. Sorry to interrupt you, but what would the league do if the Packers, let's say, came down with 25 cases of COVID and like all they're like 75% of their starters or something? You know what I mean? Like, what if a team would they have to forfeit all those games? Ugh, I just wonder, like, if one NFL player dies because they came back too early, is that worth the $10 billion TV contract? I know the answer to that question, and it's a depressing one. But it just feels like we're all like, what has changed to allow this? You know, like Minnesota just had like what 750 people yesterday hospitalized for it. Like the numbers not going down. It just feels like everyone is in such a rush to get back to normal that it's just hard because you could test these guys 5 times a day, but what if they're asymptomatic? Um, so on and so forth. I just feel like maybe they're coming back too soon.
I think the idea behind that is, and actually, it would probably be best. And I was thinking about this the other day. It would probably, because you know how for training camp, there's a portion of training camp where they don't let the players go home, where you
Yeah.
stay at the facility. And I can't remember how long it is, but I want to say it's probably for about a good 2 or 3 weeks
I think it's
ish.
2.
2 weeks. So it's actually probably best if they were to start train. If they would have started training camp like mid-May ish, when they had the when facilities got the opportunity to test rapidly, it probably would have been best to get all your players in the facility to where you can care for them, and if they are exposed you can treat them, and to that point by the season comes around most people have antibodies to it, because trying to keep these people protected for so long and then going out to go travel for 16 17 weeks in a row, you're putting them at greater risk to actually be exposed.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
so the idea behind it is get these guys in there now, and that if you have somebody exposed, they will. I mean, these guys are top tier athletes. Their immune systems are probably some of the best in the world. The idea is that most guys, if they are catch it, they would probably recover in probably a weeks or 2 weeks time. Because actually, if you there are several players. I want to say I don't think it was football players. I want to say it was Donovan Mitchell of the Utah Jazz, who said if he hadn't been tested, he wouldn't even have known he had it. There was Rudy Gobert who said his symptoms were mild. I want to say Von Miller said his symptoms were pretty mild too. So I think the idea is that if somebody is going to be exposed within the facility, you kind of weed out and create this herd immunity among the players so that when it does come time to actually play actual football, there's less of a risk.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess I didn't realize that I thought they went home. But you're right, they do stay at a hotel for a while.
Yes, I mean it's a very short period of time, but the virus itself only in a healthy person, the virus itself only lasts about a week to 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I think it's a good dry run for the team because I know they're like what they have built in Egan right now is like phase 1 or phase 2 of like a 15 phase thing that's going to take 20 years to build, and I think they want to build like this little bubble city for people, but also for rookies to, have like a condo there. Then they can go grocery shopping there. They can do everything in this little area. And the Wilfs will essentially make all this money off of it. And so by keeping them there, I think that's just alluding to the future. Anyway, I just am very relieved. I just talked to the director of PR from the Vikings like last week, and it seemed like they were still kind of batting around different ideas. I'm not sure how things are going to work for the media. We traditionally have 1 or 2 guys there every day of camp. We didn't last year because there was this halt put on non-traditional media and the access that people had. So basically everybody that didn't have a TV station, radio station, or newspaper didn't get to go. I've been working with the team in the last year, in a way to kind of weed out smaller sites that are more hobby oriented from sites like ours where we have a staff and do it for a living. So the hope is that I'll be able to fly you bastards out to Minneapolis to actually see camp in person, because it's just it'll bring a tear to your eye. It's so cool. And I full disclosure, I have this really I shouldn't say this on the air, but like I could see you guys being way better suited. Spoiler alert! At it just watching, especially early in the early days of training camp, guys in shorts like walk, turn, catch the ball. It's like, what am I going to write about? Like, hey, Justin Jefferson walked and turned and caught the ball. I have this weird mental block about it. But there's these guys just spitting gold out of these small things, and then you get to run up to the players after practice and do scrums and ask them all these questions. And I've asked a few questions, but I want to see if you guys have the same issue. Zimmer terrifies me. Absolutely terrifies me. The first question I heard him answer, he mocked this reporter for like 2.5 minutes, and I was like, all right, nope.
Yeah, I think I'd be pretty scared Zim would kind of just blow my question off. Just kind of like next question. I mean, I think, all right, man.
Yeah, he's good at that.
I don't know that I would. I don't know that I would have the balls to ask Zimmer any sort of question with meat on it. Like,
hey, ask him about his defense. See what he says. Hey, did you know your pass defense wasn't all that last year? How are you gonna fix that?
Oh, can you imagine?
Oh,
I would like to think that I could do that, and maybe if they had like an open bar or something, But yeah, there's no way I'm asking that question.
Into me, and I would enjoy every second of it.
Yeah, the first question I heard someone ask was this long rambling thing about essentially what the most important aspect of a punter's job was, and the guy was kind of alluding to it made no sense, and Zimmer just basically said punting, and everyone laughed, and the guy's face just turned like purple, and I was like, oh yeah, cool on all that.
Just ask him questions. Yeah, just ask him questions about Britton Colquitt the entire time. Just never get off of it.
Hey, he's a great holder. You might love him.
Yeah,
Sean Borman loves him, so.
So there's this rumor floating around NFL talking heads and websites from about 10 to 12 hours ago that because of COVID, and I don't really know specifically what, that just seems like such a blanket thing, why COVID, the salary cap in 2021 could end up being $40 to $50 million less than it is this season. Traditionally, because of the way contracts work for players, and with television contracts, ticket prices going up, so on and so forth, we've seen the salary cap go up between $10 and $12 million each year the last few years, at least since the last CBA was signed, and it would be a gigantic disaster if the NFL, each team, their cap went down $40 to $50 million, and I can't imagine that the NFL would allow that, just because by virtue of that, every team would suddenly be over the cap by a tremendous amount of money. They would have to shed these contracts of players, then who would re-sign them. It would almost, you would think, make the league grind to a standstill, because you would be sorting through all of these players, their contracts, resetting the market for re-signing these guys. Then you have to look at, okay, extending players. A lot of people are pointing to Dalvin Cook and what this could mean for his contract or future with the Vikings. And so I think there's solutions that could be had. I saw people saying they could essentially take out loans against future earnings to bridge that gap. I know, Deshaun, that you didn't seem to think that this was a possibility.
So the NFL obviously, nothing's ever, set in stone with a little over, I think, 100 days until the season starts, but they're planning to have some kind of fan stuff in stadiums. So I want to say, so the 50 million, I think, was the absolute max. 50 million is if you cut out all fans. So, I mean, even with fans, I think even with some fans, you kind of cut that number in half. And like you said, I think dropping the salary cap by a full 50 million would completely just disorient the entire league. I mean, like you
That's
said,
like what, a quarter of your cap, right? Because the cap's like at 200 million right now, so
yeah,
it'd be
about a quarter of your
25% of
cap.
your cap.
Yeah, it
Jesus.
completely resets every contract at every position. So I don't think there's any way the league lets that happen. But also, I mean, with them planning to have fans in stadium, I can kind of see them, maybe jacking prices up a little bit. Also, you have like the suites and stuff where there's a very limited amount of people. There's a lot of stuff they can do to kind of like fill that gap. They can also maybe borrow from TV stations to try to, keep that kind of stuff going. So I think they'll do well enough that they won't have to, cut the salary cap. Because I feel like cutting the salary cap is kind of like worst case scenario. Like when you
Yeah.
force a team to start trying to like, get rid of star players, you start to mess with like the balance of the NFL, and things just started to kind of get weird when teams have to drastically move like that. So I mean, it leaves a lot of room for creativity to see what they're going to do. I know at my job, what we've started to do, for anybody who doesn't know, I work in a hospital. So what we've done with our waiting room is sometimes waiting room gets full, and people have to sit really close to each other, and everybody's sick. We have these little stickers that says, social distancing, don't sit here, move over a seat, so that everybody is 6 feet apart. Of course, that means that sometimes people have to stand outside because there's no seats left. But what it does is it ensures that nobody is, that close. And sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. I mean, there are going to be people who are too scared to go to football games. But
Yeah.
then again, I mean, Minnesota fans are crazy, so I think that stadium would be packed if they would allow it. That stadium would be packed. But
For sure.
I think most teams, except if you're the Chargers who don't have fans, I think I think most stadiums will have as many fans as the NFL allows.
Yeah. I wonder what that'll do for ticket prices. Like the supply will go down so low. These are really strange times. Just to think of,
So far,
you know,
I do have tickets in my shopping cart. So far, aren't too bad. I have tickets for the Christmas game, which is prime time, and I want to say
oh,
it's about 800 for relatively decent seats, which isn't bad.
what,
But
two of them?
yeah, two tickets, 800 for I want to say about mid-level seats, kind of towards the end zone, but like kind of in that corner-ish area.
Yeah.
So it's not terrible for a primetime game on Christmas. So I'm just kind of waiting to see. I might have to buy
you
it.
been?
Is that's a home game?
That's an away game. It's in New Orleans.
Oh. Oh. Wow.
I don't think I could handle going to like any sort of like game of consequence in New Orleans. I went to Monday night when they opened the bank, and it was, and I went to the playoff game where they I've been to three. It just occurred to me I've been to three Saints games at US Bank because I also went to the one where Thielen fumbled right before halftime, and we lost. So. It's bad. It's bad when the Saints are doing well because their fans are very much like they're quiet when they're not winning, but once they get going, they like to talk a lot of trash.
Have you guys, either of you, been to Lambeau?
No,
I have not. Their seats suck. I would never. But from what I've seen, their seats are like horrendous. I would like.
Aren't they like benches?
They're
bench.
I think like 50% of the stadium, like especially like all of the old part is all like benches, and then like there's some
Williams Arena
seats.
at the U of M.
Yeah.
Right? Can you sitting on a bench for 4 hours to watch a? I mean,
that's where me and my dad have like my dad has partial season tickets, so I usually go to a game or two. And that's what TCF was in the students. We were in the student section.
That's true.
The end opposite of where Walsh's field goal was. So I saw immediately when he kicked it that it was gonna be missed. I was at that one too. But yeah, I mean, benches are fine as long as you're getting up. Me and my dad especially are like, defenses on the field. second or third down, if it's a big, bigger downs, we always stand up. So so it's not that big of a deal if you're into the game. If it's kind of a bad game and you're sitting a lot, I could imagine it being terrible.
Yeah, I think when I went to the Giants. I went to the Giants game last year, and they have like the traditional like bleacher, like foldable seats, which I mean wasn't terrible. Like you said, you're up a lot, so you don't really feel it too
And
much.
people bring those like pad things too, or you can
Yeah,
buy them in the
sometimes, yeah.
stadium. Those are pretty sweet. A lot of people in Wisconsin have those pads built in, if you know what I mean. Um, Body shaming jokes. We're all over the place. What was oh yeah, speaking of the salary cap, I was going to make a joke, 25% of the team or one Cousins and one Dalvin Cook, since their contracts are essentially going to be 22, 23% of the overall salary cap. As a segue into story from PFF that I the first comment that I saw on Twitter was hilarious. Was it pretty effing false? I think was this in regards to Cousins being the Vikings MVP from the last 10 years statistically. That was a Kirby find, and so I'll let you explain that because I have all sorts of questions as to how you can even ascertain that.
So yeah, the idea is that PFF created, I think it's PFF created, the wins above replacement for football. That's like, it's been a thing in baseball for 25, 30 years now. Like where, so essentially wins above replacement is how many games. So the baseline 0 is like how many games like an average player at that position would be expected to help the team win, and that's 0. Like that's the exact league average is 0, and then you go up and down whether you're better or worse than that.
And that's per position.
It's in,
or is it like only skill positions, or quarter? Is it
I have
quarterback focused?
I have no idea how the football one works because I didn't really.
Is it one for the guard position?
It does, I'm sure. I didn't read it as far as like the football one is concerned. Baseball, it's pretty easy because it's static. Like pitchers is a different algorithm than like fielders essentially. So you don't really. It's pretty easy there. I would imagine the football one is extremely different. And the reason that Cousins is so high is because he's a quarterback. I have to imagine that position is weighted incredibly high compared to, like Deshaun said, a guard.
They have a positional value variable essentially that weights it for like a punter.
Well, where does Holder fall into that? Because Britton Colquitt as a holder should get at least one win above replacement.
He's the GOAT.
But yeah, I mean it's so funny because they put. The wording of the tweet was, if I'm remembering it correctly, is Kirk Cousins is the Minnesota Vikings MVP of the past decade, per PFF WAR. So that's wins above replacement, and it's really funny because they use the term MVP. So like technically, maybe according to their algorithm. But their algorithm is obviously weighting quarterbacks super high. Which is, I mean, it's not necessarily wrong, but I also think that quarterbacks are overvalued by a lot of analytical tools.
Yeah, I'm looking at holy macaroni. Okay, so I'm trying to find like the ranking of quarterbacks from 2019 for just WAR. Russell Wilson is by far the MVP. So he is number one, obviously. His PFF WAR is 4.08. The number 2 quarterback is Mahomes, and he's a 2.96. Dak Prescott's a 2.4. Rodgers is a 2.38. That surprises me. Lamar Jackson is a 2.29. So Russell Wilson is a full win ahead of those other guys, or a full
Lamar Jackson. 2.2? What? That is insane.
I'll read it again. Russell Wilson 4.08, Mahomes 2.96, Prescott 2.4, Rodgers 2.38, Lamar Jackson 2.29.
The
Where
Ravens
does
were by far the best team in the NFL last year. There is no reason for Lamar Jackson to be on that list. I mean,
You
where
know?
don't get me wrong,
where
he was
does
MVP. That team was crazy.
where do the refs fall in? Where do Green Bay's refs fall in?
Yeah, how is Rodgers ahead of Lamar Jackson? What a crock.
It's
Um,
it's a really interesting stat, and it works extremely well for baseball, but that's because everybody's kind of not I understand there's positional differences, but 1 through 9 in the field is you can weight that pretty much the same, and then you can weight pitchers pretty much the same, and you're not gonna like lose any. Like there's no way, like the parity between the comparison makes a lot of sense. In football, obviously, like the algorithm needs to be weighted because, like we were talking about, positions mean or like the level of importance is different. But I can't imagine that a quarterback should be weighted as heavily as it is compared to like a defensive back or a defensive end. It's just it's insane. It's a stat that I don't think transfers well. Is I guess what I'm getting at.
I'm looking at Football Outsiders, and this is for DYAR, which is defense adjusted yards above replacement. Combined with the DVOA, defense adjusted value over average. And here's their quarterback rankings. Dak is number 1, Mahomes 2, Brees, Wilson, Lamar Jackson, Carr,
And
Cousins, Rodgers.
and
So
this
Cousins
is and this is where analytics fail.
What? Well, how did that work?
I don't know. We're not analytics guys, but it's interesting to think about that. Like, if you're taking that formula that Cousins in 2 years has been better than, obviously any quarterback in Vikings in the past decade for the Vikings.
For sure. I mean, isn't he the only guy in the NFL that's had 25 or more touchdowns the last 5 seasons? I actually talked about this on the Scoop last week, and we were off. And this is a good question to ask both of you. It just feels like to me, I don't know if it's COVID or if people are resigned to the fact that Cousins is going to be here for a while, so there's really nothing they can do about it. But I feel like I'm seeing a lot more positive stuff about Cousins on Vikings social media. A lot of like guys like Nick Olson or whomever are posting stats now that they've had time to kind of look at the last season or two, and showing that Cousins has had these, at least statistically, really good seasons for what we've come to expect as Vikings fans from the position. And while that doesn't mean a whole lot for output on the field, I think it's nice for Cousins to, I don't know. You guys know how I feel about Cousins. I've been kind of a pro Cousins guy the entire time. I bemoan the offensive line a lot in regards to everything. But I think that it's a very strange dichotomy to have people my age, especially, who have waited their entire lives. I turn 36 the day after tomorrow. And a pause for happy birthday. Didn't get it? Show over. But
I put a mental note up here to text you in 2 days.
That's all I'm asking for. The people that have all been just hoping against hope that they're going to draft somebody they can develop. And I know that's not what ended up happening with Cousins, but what is he, 31? He's 31 years old now. He's doing things that we haven't seen outside of Culpepper, I guess, in my lifetime, from a guy who wasn't a year or two away from retiring and doing commercials about copper socks. And so it's just always been strange to me that people have wanted to explain away what he's done, and focus on what he has done or hasn't done as well. I don't know if I'm just kind of seeing confirmation bias out there, but it seems like people are starting to warm to the idea that Cousins is our guy.
I've definitely seen a lot more positivity. I don't know. Well, I don't know if I've seen a lot more positivity as much as I've not seen the negativity. And maybe just those people who are generally negative on Cousins are too busy being negative about other things. But
That's the most internet sentence I've ever heard in my entire life.
but yeah, I think
Internet.
it's you brought up a good point that like this is essentially all that Vikings fans have been waiting for years is just like stability at the position and like a good quarterback, like not even necessarily like you don't even necessarily need Hall of Fame level of play to be a the best Vikings quarterback in a long time. Like he's literally just he's very good. So it is interesting. I think it's the pessimist in a lot of people that brings out the hate for Cousins, and we're not seeing that right now. Like I said, I think a lot of those
Did
people
you
are
guys
pissed off about other
passed
things.
away?
I
Do you
mean,
think that if Cousins' name was Teddy Bridgewater or Christian Ponder, and he was putting up the wins and losses and stats, everything was identical. He was just a different person, maybe, or just someone they drafted who wasn't making the amount of money that he made. If people would be happy, I have a feeling they would. I think people just were so freaked out about that money, the amount of money that they gave him, that it just kind of poisoned the well for the entire experience. I don't know. I guess we'll see. I'm a little I'm warming to some of the offensive line stuff. I know this wasn't on the agenda, but I've seen Bradbury came out. I forget who covered that article. Was that you, Kirby? Talking about the different guards that he's been practicing with. I don't know. How do you guys feel about that notion that the reason they haven't made moves for the interior of the offensive line is that they're the coaches that deal with these guys on a daily basis, or at least used to, feel like they have the answer on the roster as is. I mean, I don't know how high you guys are, because I mean, to be honest, we haven't done this show for a very long time. It's currently constructed, and so I'm not sure how you guys feel about Dozier or Collins, or you know what I mean? Like, how do you guys feel about some of those guys? Udo, I know Kirby, you got into it with one of the followers who was adamant that Udo had played guard at some point last season, and you were like, I watched every snap. No, he
yeah,
didn't, and then the guy's head
he did not.
exploded. I mean, are you guys high on those guys? I kind of feel like maybe I'm resigned to the reality of it, and I'm starting to kind of warm to the idea that maybe those guys are going to be better than, because I've been looking at Samia a lot, not so much other guys.
Listen, I'm not high on anybody, and I don't think the coaching staff really is either. Because I mean, as much you can watch these guys practice all day, and you really have no clue what you're going to get when it comes game time. We've seen it with Chad Beebe. We saw it big time with Chad Beebe. Coaching staff loved him. He got him and couldn't do anything. So
he was the darling of the offseason last year. People were. I completely forgot about that, man.
He's been the darling of 2 off seasons, and then he tweaks his ankle and he's out for the rest of the year.
Thielen last offseason said that Chad Beebe was the best route runner he'd ever seen in his entire life.
Well,
that's a really good point, man.
Thielen doesn't watch his own tape, so that's why.
Yeah, so, I guess.
I was high on Udo starting back last offseason because he kind of popped out on a screen in the first game. I think our first game was against the Cardinals, maybe? Was that our first preseason game?
No,
but whatever.
New Orleans.
I think it might have been the Cardinals game where he really, really popped out he really did well in that game. And, he didn't really get a chance, or wasn't really expected to get a chance with Brian O'Neill out there, which I also have an article coming out about Brian O'Neill and why he's on the way to becoming the best drafted lineman in Vikings history, at least for the last 2 decades. But so Udo was kind of really coming off the screen, and he was doing well. Even in the Bears game, I think he had one holding call and he might have given up like a pressure or something like that, but he like handled Khalil
He
Mack very well.
he was in the first snap that he was in was the safety given up, but and that pressure did come from his side, but I don't know. I don't like watching it. I couldn't tell if that was him or if that was a missed assignment from the inside too.
I think I know what you're talking. I think it was a. I think I know what you're talking about. I think it was. I can't remember if that was Samia or if that was Dozier. I think it might have been Samia. But anyways, I mean, he did for somebody who doesn't have flames, for somebody who didn't play, 16 games in between, it to come out, face Khalil Mack and not get completely demolished the way that Riley Reef does and Nate Soldier does is impressive. So I would honestly be excited to see Udo get a chance to start at either guard position. Other than that, I mean, I watched Samia's tape. Samia's tape isn't overly impressive. I mean, you see some good, but you also see a good amount of the bad. So either Samia, I wouldn't be too excited. Dozier, I mean, he was okay for I think a game, but after that, he started to like show why he's not a starter. Collins, we've had forever, and he's kind of on his last legs with the team, haven't had a chance to prove himself. So we have like this crop of unproven talent, and we're just kind of hoping somebody takes the position and runs with it, which is kind of
what would you say when you said the bad with Samia? What is he bad at? Is it like a technique thing? Is he? I've heard a lot of people say he's a project, which can mean a myriad of things.
So there's really not enough tape to like real. I mean, and there might be actually. I might have to go back and watch the preseason, but I watched the Chicago game, and you see sometimes he gets driven back, maybe not having the anchor, maybe getting hit by a swim move or so. His run blocking was probably his best, where you've seen him actually defeat his guy across the line, push him back a little bit. I actually want to say I'm not entirely sure, but I want to say Mike Boone's second big run of the game was due to like kind of like this combo block between Samia and Udo where it kind of sprung him loose. So you see him do stuff like that, you're like, oh, that's good. But then, in pass protection and other stuff, you're just kind of like, he has a lot of work to do there, which is basically like Pat Elflein all over again, which is what you don't want. So I'm not super confident there yet.
Yeah, just to jump on that, I think the difference, because I'm a little higher on Samia than I think you are. Just to jump on that, I think it is a lot of technique things, and I don't think it's like Elflein. Like Elflein puts himself in position most of the time to make blocks. He's just not. He's not strong enough, or he doesn't have that sort of. I don't know if it's that mentality or what, but he just doesn't fit the mold of a good offensive lineman. But I think Samia has it. I think it's just a matter of getting him around on technique. And there's a good possibility that he never gets there on technique. But I hope Samia is the one that I have the most hope for getting there.
Me too.
For all the offensive linemen, Samia will probably be the top candidate for that right guard position.
Yeah, but
he played on like the best line in the country, so I'm just always surprised that he hasn't acclimated better.
I mean, he was probably the worst of that best line, though. Like,
he had to have been.
But still, I mean, I think he's got a chance to be very good. I don't think he's got the low floor that we're kind of used to seeing from the Spielman draft picks, a la Danny Isadora and Willie Beavers and everybody else. There are
so bad.
There are positives to his game, and not all just negatives you're hoping to be turned into mediocrity.
Do you think there's any reality in which Elflein's the guy again next year?
I see it, and it bothers me so much that that's a possibility, because the Vikings can cut Elflein, save like $3 million, and have enough money to bring back a Klein, to bring back a Griffin, to sign someone like Drake Kirkpatrick. They can let him go and do better. I mean, Ezra Cleveland is already like, even from his college tape, you can already see that his run blocking is going to transfer. The thing you're worried about is him having the strength to hold up in pass protection on the inside against guys like Grady Jarrett and Akeem Hicks and Aaron Donald. That's what you worry about. So I think, and it's really super important that the Vikings actually get this training camp, because now they can actually go out there and they can witness Cleveland actually put in time on the inside to decide whether they want him to actually make that move. And if he does, I mean, I don't see a good scenario where Pat Elflein is a starting left guard. I don't see a scenario where the Vikings O-line gets better with a guard that almost gave up like 40 pressures last year and like 9 sacks or something insane like that. So, I mean, I'm hoping they move on from him or maybe bench him. I mean, he's a quality run blocker, but the deficit in pass protection is just like horrendous, to the point where you're almost kind of putting yourself at a disadvantage to continue to put him out there in pass blocking, especially when you had the Packers line Zadarius Smith inside for
Oh my God,
almost like an entirety of a game to really just bully him. And then you have the Bears, who just signed Robert Quinn, and they get Akeem Hicks back for an entire season. I think we gotta. It's time to move on. I mean, and even if you do get worse, which isn't likely, even if you do worse than Elflein, it's time to move on. You saved that $3 million, maybe use the cap you have left to put elsewhere, or you just don't pay him and you let it roll over to next year when you have this abundance of cap, and you can maybe go out and get a Brandon Sheriff or a Joe Thuney, who are scheduled to be free agents next season.
There's also there's also the possibility that I don't see Elflein playing in any sort of, prominent capacity past this season. Hopefully not even through most of this season, if things work out ideally, which, knowing the Vikings offensive line history, is not going to happen. But I would think that next year's draft class for guards is supposed to be stronger than this year's. I would think that maybe then, with all their picks next year and having, if the theory is they addressed the defense this season in the draft, that next year they go heavy on targeting offensive linemen, especially guards. Like Wyatt Davis out of Ohio State would be my dream fit right now.
Which would be relatively ironic.
Next year's draft is interesting because, I mean, even going into next year's draft, no matter what happens this season, the Vikings don't have many needs left. I mean, you kind of have the continuing project of Ezra Cleveland, so you wouldn't draft a tackle. I mean, you could draft a guard. I mean, how you might draft a safety if Anthony Harris decides to walk, maybe at end. And then you have the QB position, which you can finally address to have somebody sit behind Cousins if Nate Stanley doesn't turn out to be the guy.
Nate Stanley will not be the guy. I'm just calling that right now.
He might come out and kill the preseason. We don't know yet.
Nate Stanley is Joel Stave 2.0.
Maybe we can get Jake Brown to throw a pass.
Was it you, Kirby, that wrote or was that you, Deshaun, the tank?
Yeah, that was me. So
what are you? Yeah, explain that a little bit. I mean, I know it wasn't, I can say tongue in cheek, or I don't think, obviously you don't think the Vikings would literally bomb this season for the chances of drafting him, but I'm interested in your guys' takes on him. I've watched a couple of his games. And
on who?
Who are we talking about?
What's his face? The quarterback.
Trevor Lawrence.
Yes, thank you.
Goldilocks.
I mean, as you guys know, I don't pay like a massive amount of attention to college football during the season, but from what I hear, people say Trevor Lawrence is like this generational talent quarterback, like the next Andrew Luck or something like that. So I mean, if you were there and you can snag a guy like that, especially with Cousins kind of becoming expendable in what 2022, I mean you have to do it. I mean, it's the QB position. It's his potential is just off the charts. It's too off the charts to not to. If and that's if you're there. So many people, there are going to be so many teams vying after that spot. It's going to be like ridiculous. So if a QB, the team that's there that doesn't need a QB is willing to trade out that spot, they might end up with like 4, 5, 6 first round picks. Like it's going to be an insane run for that first round pick. You might even actually see some people actually tank for that. Like if you thought the hype was real for Joe Burrow, like Trevor Lawrence is gonna it's gonna be insane.
Which the thing is, Burrow wasn't even the consensus number one until Tua got hurt. So
Right.
Lawrence has been the consensus number one for this year since his freshman season.
Right, since he started playing. I mean, there's Justin Field and there's Trey Lance, but just the magnified hype around this kid you haven't seen since like Cam Newton. So I just think I don't think the Vikings will be that bad to the point where they actually get that first round pick. But also, there's a few teams that might be that bad where they might not need that pick. The Bengals are a really big candidate to be really bad. I mean, a lot of people are banking on AJ Green to come back for Joe Burrow, but AJ Green is 32, almost 33 years old.
Yeah.
He's not going to be Randy Moss anymore. The Dolphins, I mean, they put together a good team, but not all good teams gel. They have a good chance to still go like 3-13 or 4-12. Who else? There's the Jets. They still have Sam Darnold. I mean, you have Sam Darnold. You're not gonna go over Trevor Lawrence. The Giants still have Daniel Jones. So there's
Eli Manning 2.0.
So there's a lot of teams out there that have QBs in place, and I mean, I wouldn't fault anybody for pulling a Cardinals and, getting rid of their guy to draft Trevor Lawrence, but there's a good chance that Trevor Lawrence might not go number one overall because of the team that's there, but somebody is going to trade their entire future for that kid. The Vikings have, I mean, what 13 picks already in next year's draft? They have the ammo.
Yeah.
If they wanted to pull it, but you kind of ignore the rest of everything if you make a move like that, which I want to say it was Score North or some guy at Score North was trying to get them to trade up for Tua, trade up to the top 5 to get Tua.
I'm trying to think of what the biggest trade up has been post Ricky Williams, like when Ditka traded 2 entire drafts for him.
It was the RG3 trade, I want to say, that didn't work out for anybody. Like the worst big trade in NFL history, where the Redskins traded their organization to the Rams, and it didn't work out for anybody.
Yeah, and that's funny. I mean, the Vikings were in the running for a while for that top pick, and then I think late in the season, Joe Webb won some meaningless game against the Redskins or something, and I shoveled out TCF Stadium that game, and then they fell to 4th, and they took Khalil. But I mean, that's the argument that I think people have had for a long time, is the Vikings are never bad.
It's
outside of 2011 when they were 3-13, they're always around 500 or at least 6-10, and maybe that has something to do with the fact that we've yet to land on one of those quarterbacks that is once in a generation talent, or just I mean, we're not asking for much. I
think the name to keep an eye on, and actually this guy he's super intriguing, and I think he might be the reason why I actually start watching a little bit of football. Trey Lance I don't even know where he's from, but if you watch some of his tape, is North Dakota State, it's not a huge school, is it?
They're Division 1 FBS now, right? I think they're Division 1. Or are they Division 2 still? No, they're Division 2 still. Because they're just run through everybody.
NDSU. No, they're Division 1.
They're Division 1 FCS. That's what I mean. Yeah, basically. Basically, he's Carson Wentz again, but better, supposedly.
So
who? Trey Lance?
Yeah, that's the hype.
That's the hype guy this year. But I mean, besides Justin Fields, who the people say are pretty good. Is pretty good. And then you have Trevor Lawrence, of course. You also have the guy out of Minnesota who people say is pretty good.
Tanner Morgan.
Yeah, so I mean, you have these guys, and then Trey Lance is just like this really intriguing. He's like the Jalen Hurts, but like a tad bit better. I would say Jordan Love, but I wasn't a big fan of Jordan Love. But he's like the Jalen.
He's from Minnesota, from Marshall, Minnesota.
Who is?
Yikes, that's in the middle of nowhere. What do you think of Tanner Morgan?
Me?
Kirby?
So I wasn't huge on Morgan at the beginning of last year. I don't think anybody was expecting him to be exceptional. I think everybody was excited because it was a redshirt year for the other guy. I don't know what Alex. I don't know his last name. Hornibrook, not Hornibrook. That's somebody else. Either way, so Morgan was kind of like the second choice after like the other guy got his red shirt. At least in my book, because I was excited about the other guy for, I think, a few plays he made against like Nebraska the year before. But then Tanner Morgan just showed that he had this excellent deep ball. Like he can actually hit like throws down the sideline, which is, I don't think I've ever seen a Gophers quarterback who can do that in my lifetime.
Me either, man.
Like I've lived through Mitch Leidner and Marquise Gray, who the best thing you can say about them is that they can run the ball.
I was gonna say Leidner, man. Ugh.
Oh my god.
I wanted to like him too. But
he was an excellent athlete, but
big time.
Oh my god. This is gonna be side note, but Philip Nelson was quarterback for the one XFL team for a while.
Is he the redhead?
Yeah, he's from Winona.
That got in a fight and had to leave whichever team he was on or whatever. I think he got like in a bar fight and like beat the shit out of somebody and like had to essentially leave that team for another team.
Maybe. I don't know. He's doesn't have any arm talent. I watched him try to throw a bubble screen. He couldn't get it to the guy. But yeah, I like Tanner Morgan. I think he's the best quarterback that the Gophers have had in a very, very long time. And I think he's probably right now sitting in that 3 to 5, like 3rd to 5th round range. I think he gets the benefit of like having two of the best receivers in the nation the last couple of years in Rashad Bateman and Tyler Johnson. So we'll see how he does this year with Bateman and then a few other guys. But I would not be upset.
And they got that 4-star running back, right? That everyone's super psyched about. Irving.
Something
like, from Illinois.
Yeah, they've had a few like commits from other states that are like somewhat unexpected. So it's we're entering like somewhat of a new like golden age of Gopher football, maybe. Fingers crossed.
That's insane to me, man.
I never thought it would happen again. I was like so ready to just be mediocre forever. But yeah, I'm excited about Morgan. I think he could be good at the next level. His mechanics are really sound, and he actually knows how to read a defense somewhat. I don't think he's exceptional at it, but like they run that RPO option or read pass option so much that like he actually knows what to look like. He actually has to look at the defense and make a decision. So I think that will give him a step up at the next level. But yeah, I think he's got very good like actual mechanics for throwing, which is awesome. So I like him a lot.
Philip Nelson beat a guy up in Mankato and gave him brain damage, permanent brain damage, and they got 2 felony charges, and then pled down to a misdemeanor. But I think that's what ran him out of Minnesota. He didn't handle it well either. He was really obstinate about it. It would be nice. I've told the story on air before, on Morning Joe's, I believe. My sister played hockey for the Gophers back when they won a couple national championships, and I used to be able to go to the whatever the building was called where athletes got to go, because they had like really good food there, and like it was just really fancy in there. And I just would sit there, and we would talk. Her and I took a Spanish course together, so we would do our homework or whatever. Mainly her doing homework and me copying it. And they had a big glass display of like how amazing Gopher football team was, and like replicas of the little brown jug and Floyd the pig and all that. And then like once it got past like the 40s, it just ended and it was just like empty. Um, that always kind of bothered me. I like to root for teams that I'm emotionally invested in, and that typically requires the ability to make a run at some point. But I've been resigned to just saying, I was so spoiled when Glenn Mason was the head coach. That's how I felt up until recently. So it's cool to see the Gophers do what they're doing. Apparently, according to our friends over at MinnesotaSportsFan.com, their biggest section of their website, since they cover all sports, is the Gophers section. Month to month, not just during the season or whatever. People are just super hyped about that, and so that's we'll be launching a something that we talked about for a very long time, way too long, especially in terms of how long you've been waiting, Kirby, and I apologize for that. But the draftteam.com is something that hopefully we'll be partnering with Varsity News Network.com, VNN.com, that does high school prospect tracking, and we can tie that in with what we're going to be doing in regards to tracking college players, and as it ties into the Vikings and just generally in the NFL. Beyond that, we're also going to be launching a partnership with MinnesotaSportsFan.com called UFDA, which is essentially a centralized location for people to go to read content from sites like ours that's local and independent and fan-driven in the best way possible. I think some people look at that condescendingly, but more so from people that really are fans of the team but are still, professional writers. Read about it, listen to podcasts or watch YouTube shows, discover new podcasts or shows, discover new websites. And then the largest component is essentially the ability to communicate about the teams that you love on a local level in a way that nobody else really has been able to offer. I spend, if you can't tell from my appearance, a lot of time underground and online, like some sort of earthworm human being hybrid. And there's a lot of large national apps that I enjoy, but I feel like nobody's really connected the dots between social media and consuming sports news in a way that we're hoping to really do. And I think we have beta tested a lot of stuff on purpleptsd.com, and that's going to be coming to UFTA. User groups, live chats for live events, obviously like an old school message board, even like an internal Twitter system for Minnesota sports fans where you can add followers, friends, implement your social media accounts, DM people, so on and so forth. So we're really excited. That should be happening. Both of those sites will be up in the next 8 weeks if everything goes according to plan. But yeah, I wanted to thank everybody for tuning in. We were off for last week for semi-obvious reasons. I hope everyone out there is staying safe. And we'll all get through this together. But this has been About the Labor for the 5th of June, 2020, aka the worst year ever. We will catch up with you guys at the end of next week.
Happy birthday, Joe.
Go. Thanks, man. And I had to cut off this, so I'm going to download the audio from your